Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us in person and online. Um, First, just quick housekeeping. We have our minutes from last time we met. Does anyone have any changes? No?
No, I make a motion to accept the minutes as
No.
presented.
Do I have a second?
A second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, great. So we'll devote most of our time today to Professor Amy Rhodes to kind of talk about some of the research that she's doing and has done in the past and kind of get a better grasp on the current state of the Fen. Call it by its proper name.
Yeah,
sure.
I guess I've worked with the Kampoosa Bug Stewardship Committee a long time ago, back kind of I guess in the years 2002 or 2005, kind of in that time range, when I was doing a hydrogeochemical study of the wetland. So that was a pretty intensive project, and then and those data got published later in a paper that I think you may have. And then there was some renewed work in the wetland funded by Massachusetts Fish and Wildlife and Department of Transportation. And I'm not quite sure how that funding all kind of got partitioned between those two organizations, but basically my understanding is that the Department of Transportation was funding an environmental engineering laboratory at the University of Massachusetts, led by Eric Heinlein. And they set up a study design to monitor the salt concentrations or the geochemistry, focusing quite a bit on chloride concentrations of Kampoosa Brook, where it comes into the wetland, where the highway crosses the wetland on the northern side, and then also where it exits the wetland by Route 7, as well as monitoring a adjoining tributary. And then they've also been monitoring some groundwater in the wetland itself. And they largely cited their sample sites based on where I had put sample sites in prior work. So it was kind of building off of that. And they've been since 2018, I believe, have been sampling those sites monthly. And I've checked in with them on Friday and today, and they're continuing. They've still been continuing with monthly sampling, with a small break, during the pandemic, and then a little while ago when there was some beaver activity that was upsetting the sampling work. But so that sampling is ongoing. Along with that, they have been monitoring the water levels in Kampoosa Brook, as well as the neighboring tributary, in order to set up a relationship between water level and the discharge of those streams. So what discharges is it's a measure of the volume of water that is passing by the location over a given period of time. So it gives you information about the stream flow. And so the goal of combining that discharge information with water chemistry is to calculate what's called a flux of chloride, in order to understand how much chloride is moving, coming into the wetland and exiting the wetland by multiplying that discharge amount by the concentration. Another thing that they added to those stations that are measuring water level is a probe that monitors the specific conductance of the water, and they can use that measurement to correlate to chloride concentrations. So that enables them to, so in addition to the monthly sampling, they're also able to get really, like, I believe 15 or 30-minute measurements of flow and specific conductance in order to come up with a more continuous measure of chloride concentrations within the Kampoosa Brook, as well as its adjoining tributary. So that was just a lot of information, and I'm happy to pause to explain anything that.
Amy, there's a what looks like a monitoring station just on the south side of the road of Kampoosa Brook. Is that one of the ones that's still being used?
Yes, so if I know you distributed the recent paper by my student, and figure 1 shows a map.
Okay.
I can share my screen. Oh, I guess I can't. But if you
Right.
have it, you'll see that there are 4 red dots. And those are the locations of gauge stations that the UMass group installed, where they're monitoring the flow of the river, so the discharge. They're measuring specific conductance at those locations as well, and as a proxy for chloride concentration.
So
So,
yes, it is.
yes. So if we go north to south, MV 100 is upstream of the highway. So that's like a reference site to understand what the background levels might be. KB 100 is just downstream of the Interstate 90. So that's sampling the stream right at the culvert. And then if we go further downstream, you'll notice KB 100 is the most downstream location right at the outlet by Route 7. And then this 4th site that's called KB 100, that's sampling this other tributary from the east that enters the wetland just north of KB 100. So it contributes to the flow at KB 100.
So I had a couple questions. One, I think you said in there from other studies, both plant and animal diversity was decreasing. Is that correct?
That there have been other studies that have been funded by the Massachusetts Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah.
And that, they hired a botanist to look at the plant diversity. I think that was the last name of that is Mays. And I'm not remembering the year of that off the top of my head. It might be 2016 and thereabouts. But she was looking at the plant diversity. And did I send you a report that referenced that? If I
don't
didn't,
think so.
I will.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay, if I did, I will. So anyway, this is work that's still ongoing with the University of Massachusetts group. There have been troubles, however, since 2020, 2021, because a beaver has built a dam in front of the, I'm not exactly sure where the dam is because I haven't seen it. So it's either downstream of KB 100 or just upstream of it. Maybe it's downstream of KB 100. But what it's doing is it's backing up water into the wetland. And so what it's done is it has thrown off what's called the stage discharge relationship of the whole watershed. So the methods that they were using in order to come up with a discharge or flow value every 15 minutes has been disrupted by the beaver, and since about 2021, the measurements of discharge are not reliable because of what the beaver has done. But they're still continuing to measure water levels as well as water chemistry.
I thought they put in a leveler and were dealing with the beaver to some degree.
I think they are. I emailed the Eric and Camilla, who are the two researchers that are working on the project there at UMass, and they wrote back to say that they had put some pipes in to try to help drain that beaver, and there might have been a meeting a year plus ago with Fish and Wildlife and with the Department of Transportation, trying to think about redesigning the culvert at Route 7 just to help the water get through. But
I thought they'd busted the culvert, some of the damming and had put in a leveler and
I thought so too.
and some kind of, beaver deceiver device.
it could be. I don't have first-hand information on it, but what they were saying is that the researchers were telling me is that the beaver activity has upset their discharge calculations.
So
that
it's, oh, go ahead. You finish.
No, so since the beaver's gone in, and even since they've made some adjustments to kind of deal with the flooding, it maybe things are okay for the time being for the road, but in terms of the science of the project, those measurements are disrupted.
Yeah.
So it speaks to me to how many different people, agencies, organizations are involved in the FEN and what the communication is between everybody. And we've struggled mightily here
Yes.
to get information from people and get some kind of sense of who's talking to who, because there's also invasive management work being done there. There's TNC had been involved. I don't know if they still are. Fish and Wildlife, Native Plant Trust. There's all these agencies doing different things, and part of what we're trying to do is not necessarily coordinate it, but just make sure people know what other people are doing, because there's more than one variable.
One thing I found out recently is that the property that is on the south side of Rattlesnake that goes to the turnpike that was under the auspices of the Nature Conservancy is now under the auspices of the town.
Okay. Oh, so there's another agency.
Yeah, so it's not TNC anymore, it's town property. And I don't know whether that means.
Where was that exactly?
So where Marsh Brook goes under Rattlesnake Mountain Road, there's a tract of land has a conservation restriction.
South side?
South side, yep. That was put into effect by the Chassell family who lived just west of there. And the property was originally under the auspices of the Nature Conservancy, but when we just had a report run by Michael Blay, who's our assessor, that it now appears to have been transferred to the town. I haven't looked at it any further than that, but that's what it said in the paperwork he gave me.
Do you have any sense of if these agencies communicate?
I don't know to what extent they do. I know so the way I came back in, will indirectly answer your question for what I know. When I came back into the project, it was in 2019, because U.S. Fish and Wildlife had put out an RFP for someone to come up with a study design for doing a hydrogeochemical study at Kampoosa Bog. And so I put in a bid for that and received the funding. And it was at that time that I wrote up a study design for U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and I was provided with the UMass groups data. So they've been collecting the data and summarizing and sending
Yep.
kind of monthly reports or on some frequency reports to the Department of Transportation. But I worked on that to synthesize the information, and then using that data set as well, that's what went into this paper that was just published by PLOS One in the fall. So, and so that represents the data that was collected by the UMass group between 2018 and 2020, but then interpreted by myself and my colleague Drew Guswa, who is in the engineering program, and we both co-advised a student, Wayne Goodloveview, who's the first author on the paper. So, so that's where this paper came from. It's using the UMass data, and we kind of worked with the data up until the beaver interfered, and UMass has continued to collect data since then, but any data post beaver is not included.
Okay. And
So, but at that time, just to try to answer your question about interagency, we were talking with the Department of Transportation as well as U.S. Fish and Wildlife. U.S. Fish and Wildlife funded my work, but they were coordinating with Department of Transportation. And then the Department of Transportation provided us with salt application data so that to write this paper, we could understand how, get a decent estimate on how much salt was being applied to the highway. And so that was a critical piece of information for doing a mass balance of salt on the wetland.
And did the Mass DOT have any interest in decreasing the amount of salt? I mean, it's nice to-
Well, they didn't speak specifically to that. I think my sense is that Kampoosa Bog has been a case study from their perspective in terms of, trying to understand an environmental impact of road salt within the state. And so they've been supportive and with this data collection. And then they were supportive of us in terms of providing the salt application data and not putting any limitations on publishing the results.
They had talked at one time about having it be a low salt area through there, but I don't know that that ever got instituted.
As far as I know, the salt application rates around Kampoosa Bog are the same as, I don't think there's any special salt application.
So we have a little camp in the Adirondacks, and they've been going nuts up there about the whole salt level in the various waterways, and particularly in what people think of as Lake Placid, only it's actually Mirror Lake. And they were very alarmed by the fact that maybe 4 years ago, it didn't turn over at all in the winter, and they realized that that was a direct result of all the salt that they were putting on the road. So they've been doing, the Sable River Association's been doing a lot of work to try and figure out alternatives to using salt and how to minimize the impacts on the waterways up there. So Mass DOT might like to look at that some. And I understood something the other day that Governor Hochul had some bill before her to be signed about
salt use?
Yeah.
Even in the Berkshires?
No. But, they could talk, Massachusetts and New York could talk to each other too. It would be helpful.
Sally, but can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Now you live right at the height of the watershed for Kampoosa.
Yes.
Brook.
Yeah.
And I remember when they put the turnpike through, and I used to go up and play with Johnny Chassell next door there, and there was a lot of white rock up there, wasn't there? Isn't it calcareous? Isn't it actually the water actually going down through a very shallow topsoil and then either running through the rock, or
There are a lot not ledges, what's the word I'm trying to think of? All through there. I mean, we have wet areas in our field that shouldn't be wet.
Yeah,
And I remember when they were putting the turnpike through, my father was on the planning board at the time and
Yeah.
was one of the people who tried to keep that from happening, but not successfully. There was a lot of white rock. I remember when they were digging, there was a lot of white rock.
yeah. I mean, certainly it must be interesting to be dealing with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, because there's the marble valleys of the Berkshires are unique in the Commonwealth. There's nothing, and in my experience, in dealing with Mass DEP, they are pretty unresponsive to regulation here. Is that what you're running into?
Well, the Conservation Commission's done a lot of, whenever any one of the transportation organizations come before us, we make them jump through any hoops we can possibly make them jump through to talk about what the impact of what they're doing might be. I mean, you can put herbicides within 10 feet of a river, which is really sort of terrifying. But when the Hill Water Company went down, probably 30 years ago, we had to dig a well, and our well had quite a high salt concentration in it. And this is, Amy, is the corner of Prospect Hill and Rattlesnake Mountain Road,
Okay.
which is upland if you were to, put a directional out of the turnpike, and you would not think that you would get road salt from the turnpike uphill. But in fact, we did get road salt from the turnpike uphill. So there's some funny stuff going on underground that seems to be carrying the salt in various places. Yeah.
It's karst, yeah.
Is there anyone you would recommend we could speak to about salt usage?
Well, the person that was my contact at the Department of Transportation was Lorraine Poland.
Okay, and she's mentioned in your paper, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she was in the position that kind of dealt with outreach and environmental impacts. So, and I haven't really been in touch with her since we worked through this paper to know, if there's any new policies at all regarding salt application around the state.
Okay, for sure.
Well, it sounds like there's a couple things, since there is so many stakeholders, and that's something we've come up against, and since this committee hasn't been, since its decline from what it was back, I'm assuming years ago when it was really, really roaring. And I think this was brought up last time, if I remember correctly, a couple of months ago. But do you think there would be any appetite for having kind of, I don't know what the correct term would be, a conference of people in Stockbridge, say in the winter time? I don't know how we would work it with the commission, because we can't all be in the same room at the same time, but doing sort of like the town forest event that we did with DCR and everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Doing like a kind of just like getting everyone in the room, having some, I don't know, presentations of what people have been working on. It sounds like you have a really good network that you're already tapped into. And we're kind of, we're coming to the party and saying, hey, like, can we all just hear what's going on? So we can start building back up to have sort of a plugged in to, so when something's happening, make our own sort of Kampoosa Bog conference / have presentations, invite DOT. I don't want to say it's as public as the town forest event that we did. So just to be clear, we have about 100 and 50 people show up for the statewide town forest event. And we had people give presentations and did tours and stuff like that. But do you think that would be some way for us to like start coalescing and start networking and start kind of tapping into these resources? Would that be feasible? Would that be?
Well, I do think there are enough people that have engaged with the bog in different ways that to have a group that would organize them and bring them together, I think would be very beneficial. You know, maybe the first time you bring them together isn't a public conference, but
Right.
you know, sometimes you just have to get people together just to find out what the different issues are in a general sense. But you know, my sense from where I've left off, you know, from what I understand, and you know, I haven't talked to the folks in like about a year, so you know, a lot has changed in our country and
Yeah.
budgets and everything. So,
Right.
but you know, it still seems like Mass DOT is funding this data collection, so that's an investment that they're making, and the data is just going back to Mass DOT. It's, you know, my sense is it's publicly funded, so it should be shared, right? And then you have sort of this issue with the road that there was like a big meeting where they're trying to bring lots of people together to talk about that culvert. The meeting got scheduled during my class, so I did not attend, but you know, but as far as I know, nothing has happened since that meeting. So there's sort of a question mark in terms of wanting to know what's going on at Route 7. You know, are there any plans to, you know, do any major alterations there to that culvert? And you know, anything like that is a major permitting process that would involve the town. So again, I would see that there would be, you know, long-term incentive for folks to want to be engaging with the community about what's going on. You know, just thinking about those two projects alone,
Yeah.
and then I've lost track of what, you know, might be going on in terms of invasive species management. So, you know, I certainly would be interested to know, and you know, and maybe there's a tie in there. It sounds like are you still talking with Jess?
Yeah, she has,
Toro.
she did
Toro.
treatments recently. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what she's doing. But maybe folks at Mass Fish and Wildlife would be interested in that. You know, I would be
Fish and Wildlife took that over, actually, DEP took it.
Okay.
They didn't like what the Concom had to say about it, and so they issued a superseding order, so they are now in charge.
I see. Okay.
But all of this in conjunction with Matt's question about bringing people together, I have really wanted to bring all the data together.
Yeah.
So that someone, you know, if you have a student at UMass or Smith or somewhere that wants to know the history and everything that's happening there, there's one place where everything is.
Right.
But it's been challenging. It's been challenging to do.
Yeah, that is challenging work to bring those data sets together, and it's in part of what I was doing back around, you know, 2020 or so, in terms of looking at the Maze report, and then also you know, working with the data from the UMass folks. They're paid to collect it, but they weren't interested in sort of working it up for publication, so they were, you know,
Interesting.
Gave us permission to work with it.
Okay.
Gotcha.
So that's how that has worked, and I haven't asked for data since this, but other than today, they did send me a graph of some of their results. So they're continuing to kind of graph things, and you know, and you know, one thing that they told me was that the water level in the wetland is in fact higher since the Beaver Dam was constructed, and it's, you know, it's come down a little bit since the modifications to the Beaver Dam have been made, but and it looks like in many cases the chloride levels are diluted by that flooding by the Beaver, which is
Gotcha.
kind of interesting.
Is that diluted because the sensors, there's not as much, it's not as much flow happening past the sensors, or is that diluted because it's actually just more water?
I think the water level stays flooded after a big rain event.
Yeah,
And so that rainwater may be diluting what's in the groundwater.
gotcha, gotcha.
That
I
would
know
be
they
my,
were very concerned about a number of the invasive or the native and endangered plant species because of the rising water level.
yes, yes. And I think, you know, that's kind of an interesting question on its own is, okay, so the beaver has created this experiment, like it or not. And so, is there an effect
Mhm.
on the,
I think they were saying that there was an effect on
Mhm.
some of the more rare species because they couldn't tolerate the higher water level.
right, right. And it's been higher for some time now. So if there was like a repeat sort of study like what Mays had done in 2016, if that were done today, one might be able to quantify some changes if that was of interest.
And that actually brings us to kind of our part B of this conversation is that we do I don't know what year it was that it was asked for. It was before me,
It was before me, 2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years ago. We do have funds for another study, particularly a hydrological study that the town has given us. That being said, that's it. That's all the wordage on it. And we have been gifted this in the sense of trying to figure out what do we do and where do we prioritize it. I've heard from kind of what you've been saying so far today that there's been a lot of hydrological studies. There's a lot of data out there. Where is the kind of blind spot in that data that it might be to get the most use out of our funding.
Sure.
Because I don't want to repeat something that's necessarily has been done 100 times and UMass is going to be graphing this for the next 20 years.
Right, right. Well, that would be the first question is to find out how long their funding's going for. But you know, they're specifically collecting. So if you look at the map in figure 1, that was handed out before the meeting, those red dots and the 3 blue triangles are places where they are routinely sampling. So the red triangles are places where they're sampling for water chemistry, and they're looking at what the chemistry of the surface water is in the wetland, and then I think at a 5-meter depth and then a 15-meter depth, or excuse me, 5 feet and 15 feet. Excuse me, I had my units wrong. And so they're taking 3 samples at each of those locations, A, B, and C, where A is closest to the wetland and C is furthest away. So it's kind of like a little transect moving away from the wetland. So they're just monitoring water chemistry there. It's not monitoring water levels there. And one thing that I've been kind of curious about is, you know, are there places of groundwater upwelling within the fen that might be you know, affecting the chemistry of the water. You talked about white rock. So that marble adds calcium and magnesium to the water, alkalinity to the water. If there's road salt contamination in that groundwater, then it may also be contributing sodium and chloride. And there might be some ways to try to figure out where is there groundwater upwelling happening. And maybe we should be monitoring the water level in the fen if we wanted to think about relationships between water levels and the invasive plant species. So that would be a way to potentially augment what's currently being done with UMass. But that's just an initial idea.
Mhm.
And, you know, more ideas come when you bring people together.
Mhm.
How would you go about doing that?
Bringing people together.
Now, measuring the groundwater upwelling, how would you?
Um, well, there's a couple ideas. One would be to install some probes that would measure the water level in the wetland. And they would be similar probes as to what is installed at the red dot locations. And it would just monitor what the water level is, and you could include a specific conductance measurement, you know, by a probe that measures both water level, water temperature, and specific conductance. And temperature sometimes can give you information about groundwater, because the groundwater temperature, particularly during the winter, tends to be warmer than the surface water temperature. So there's some ways to just monitor the water level, you know, in case if there's flooding in relationship to rain or snow melt, and then two, monitor those temperatures to indicate potential groundwater. I've also been talking with a colleague of mine, a different colleague at the University of Massachusetts, Christine Hatch, and she's been studying a wetland out in Cape Cod for a number of years, and she's been doing some drone flights over her wetland using a sensor that monitors temperature. And so again, doing this in the winter time and looking for places of groundwater upwelling due to differences in temperature on the surface of the wetland. So they kind of do it after things thaw, but it's still cold outside. So, you know, where there's perhaps warm spots in the wetland could be related to groundwater upwelling. So at least that would kind of provide a broader map of
So we
locations.
have that. We had a drone flyover in the beginning when we first reorganized. But I don't think any of us knew how to interpret it.
Oh, we did? Do we have that?
We have it.
Oh,
Well, Rich had it.
Richard.
Yeah, I'm sure we could get it,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Well, that would certainly be really nice to look at in terms of photography, what's there, and whether or not, you know, if the drone also had a sensor that was looking at water temperature,
Probably
that
not.
would also be interesting. But if not, then there might be an opportunity to, you know, say fly again. But you know, with the folks at UMass, I could reach out to them and see.
Okay, well, it was Abby's father,
Oh, yeah, okay.
Fred Saul, is that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did it, and I think it was not very expensive, but I don't think he had any kind of.
Yeah,
Sure.
we'd probably have to find someone that has the sensor.
Yeah, I think personally, I would reach out
Mhm.
at UMass.
Okay, that's good to know.
Just not that, we can, not that we can deal with per se, how much things really, really cost, but like these probes, are these, something that are purchased, say if we're doing a study, are we purchasing them? Or are we, say, paying for a study and someone's gonna use their own probes, put them in, and then take them out when they're done?
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, to be clear, who owns everything out there right now? Is that UMass?
I don't exactly know how they did it, but my sense is that probably Department of Transportation
Okay,
provided the funding, and then the UMass research group purchased the equipment that they need, and then also used the funding to pay for the personnel to go collect the samples and analyze the samples back in the lab.
gotcha.
So that's probably how that works. And So I guess technically DOT would own the probes and
Right,
own the data.
right.
You know, unless it's publicly funded, in which case we all own the data, but,
Mhm.
you know, but that's.
But you said for UMass, it's not, I mean, UMass is publicly funded, but I thought you
That's
said
right.
they
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
give us access to
Yeah.
the data. So that's
Well, just not easily,
not
easily.
easily. Okay.
Well, I don't know if you've reached out to them or not.
No, we
Yeah.
haven't. We
We
haven't.
can,
I told them that I was going to, tell you all about their measurements.
Okay,
Cool.
great. And tell them I'm an alumni. So to
Oh, I didn't tell them.
give
that.
it,
I'm sort of an alumna.
sort of, okay.
would it, again, I don't want to add to, the labor you've already given us today and everything that you've already done. But there has been quite a few contacts mentioned. Would it be possible for you to, email us just so we know everyone we talked about today, and kind of,
Sure.
where they're from, who they're part of, so that we can,
Yeah.
Yeah,
we don't want to besmirch your name or make people think you're giving out their contact information willy-nilly.
I have another question.
Yeah.
When I was presenting a groundwater proposal to the planning board about a couple of weeks ago, I had a groundwater recharge area map, which was prepared for the planning board in the 1970s. I think it was 1975. And there were two major areas north of Stockbridge, one of which was to the west of Stockbridge Bowl. And then there was a space. And then the other area was did not include Kampoosa Bog, but went from west of Prospect Hill Road to the West Stockbridge line and was quite major. And Carl Sprague pointed out, because of his visual acuity, that the turnpike went through the whole lower section. And it made me wonder if we could get the geologic data that they had. They tested the whole corridor before they came through. Could we get access to that geologic data? It would be, I mean, for example, Sally's raised a very challenging question about why water was moving uphill from the turnpike. I mean, that means there was a constrained aquifer of some sort, something that was retaining pressure, and that would certainly have shown up in the original geologic survey that the turnpike did.
That would have been in the 50s, though.
Yeah,
Really interesting.
40s, maybe even.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible, but we'd have to probably dig and, I mean, there's a lot of data we have to probably gather and figure out what is most pertinent, but it's possible, yeah, to try to dig down into that and find this section. I don't even know how they did it back then. So so it would be interesting. We should do some more digging to see where that would be, because it'd probably be DOT. Because of the stone, because of the potential upwelling, that might come out in some of the data we find at UMass. I don't know.
Okay.
Another
Yeah.
person that I just ran into recently that I think would be a good person to reach out to would be Tim Simmons. He's retired from the Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program, but he always came to every Kampoosa Bug Stewardship Committee and was a big supporter of all the scientific studies that were done back at that time, and was really is really familiar with the site. And so he is just sort of a, I think he's still engaged with a lot of things, and
He was our guy for a while.
Yeah.
For the Conservation Commission. He apparently has the information as to where the native species of Phragmites are and won't give them out.
well, there might be other things he can
That's
share.
what we've
So
been told, anyway.
Yeah.
Does he still live in Lee, do you know?
I don't think so. I think he lives in Eastern Mass, but
Okay.
I just saw him last weekend at a different conference. So
Okay, good.
Because he was married to Gail Ceresia, who did a lot of the wetland delineations in the late 90s, probably.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
can I just ask a question of you all?
course.
Yeah.
Because it's exciting to hear that the committee's back together, and I'm just wondering what your charge is and sort of what your hopes are.
So are we.
So are we.
It's not what it was before, partly because the original committee had people working in all these different agencies who were very actively involved. That's not us. So we're charged with.
I mean, we're basically what has happened within the last year is we've been kind of reconstituted to start to build it back up. And I mean, I came over from our Ag and Forestry Commission to come over here, where I had started that 5 years ago, which had been defunct. So we are kind of, I think that's why we're in such a weird spot where I don't think we are trying to come and take the lead necessarily on anything with the bog, except for to start gathering and try to start building back connections to particularly the town, because it sits in the town and we're kind of here and we see probes and we hear this and we have ideas about what the salt and what this can do. And we see people go out, but we never get any, at least, from what we don't get any information about what's happening. So I think that's what I'm kind of envisioning this year of rebuilding kind of being, while we still have some connections with some of the people like, Tim Simmons is a great example. We have a lot of people like Tim Simmons who are out there, have stories, know this and that, but don't necessarily are engaged in the active pursuits around it.
I think also we're familiar with the management plan that the previous commission came up with. So invasive management is something we want to stay on top of. Both Sally and I are on the Concom, so some of what's happening there. But personally, it's been a goal for me from the beginning to put all this information in one place, get a database where it all exists so that other people don't end up doing what we're trying to do now. And
Again, in the future.
The original inception of this committee was thanks to Judy Spencer. And when Judy died, the impetus got lost. But do you know Les Luchonic? Because he was the point at the time was to get the ACEC designation. And so that we were together with the highway department. And I was just thought of somebody else, Allison Dixon, who was involved.
And she
Is
came in.
still, yeah. And she's still around. And Tim Simmons, and I have pictures of us out on the bog, which was interesting. And we met regularly. I would say at least once a month, if not twice a month. And people came from all over. I mean, all of our stakeholders, including the Mass DOT, and so it was extremely active and extremely vibrant at the time. And we got the ACEC designation, and that was great. And then went on to talk about how do we preserve it and how do we, how do we find out what exactly is there and what are the threats to it? And that was pretty, it was active and
Got a lot done.
a lot got done and had figuring out how to get rid of the invasive species and stuff like that. So, and then it kind of went downhill after Judy died and
And you lost Lowenstein too.
Frank Lowenstein, yes,
Very active.
yep.
Let's see.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, forgot about Frank.
So that,
Is it-
no, go ahead, please.
No, I was just gonna ask if the invasive work is something that happens annually or just,
It happened last fall. I think it was on hold for quite a while, but they did do a treatment last fall.
for Phragmites or
Phragmites.
for Phragmites?
Yeah.
Originally, it was everything. Originally, they were going out in the winter on the ice and cutting the buckthorn,
Yeah,
as well as cutting bundles of Phragmites in the winter and taking them off the bog. But I don't think that the current plan is as intense.
And I was out on the periphery 2 or 3 weeks ago through Native Plant Trust looking for endangered species, which we found a lot of. And it looked very healthy. I was pleased at how good things looked. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to go out in one of those next time you do.
Me too. That's, I was,
Yeah, well, we can talk later. You gotta
Yeah.
sign up.
so kind of just bring it all back around because I want to respect our time here. Just from what I'm hearing and from what I've heard, I hear issues around beaver, water level, salt dilution, invasives, endangered species. What else am I? Those were kind of like the big buzzwords that, salt. Anything else that, we're missing?
I think that's enough.
I mean, we keep going.
I heard concern about upwelling.
Upwelling.
Yeah.
Yep.
Studying upwelling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
I'd say that's a question. I don't know. if it's
Question, that's a-
concern or what,
that-
but
yeah.
I think what's changed, in my mind, what's changed is the flooding
Mhm.
by the beaver. And then I think, where there's groundwater upwelling is just a question that's never really been answered, but
I think there's a lot of groundwater upwelling all throughout that whole area. There's springs all over Rattlesnake Mountain that come up here and there. So I think that there's a lot of stuff going on underneath that we just don't really know about.
And the world is wetter.
Yeah.
And part of it may be beaver, but it may be also
Well,
that.
yes, that's
Yeah.
true that if as rainfall amounts vary.
Well, when Nicholas Ratcliffe came through here for the USGS to map to do the bedrock map for the Stockbridge quadrangle, he was astonished by our great springs. And I've never talked to a geologist, maybe short of somebody who stumbled on gold, who was so excited. He had been at Risingdale, where they draw $3 million, 3 million gallons a day. The Jack Cook Spring in Housatonic, which is 2,000. I think it's something like 2,000 gallons a minute. I mean, that is a huge. And then you go up to the head of Monument Mountain, and you have the Great Spring at Stockbridge, which feeds Agawam Lake, and that's got to be 100 maybe 50 gallons a minute. And then the Highlawn Spring is 40 to 80 gallons. That's a calcareous tube. It's on a fault. And the Hill Water Company, how much did that flow, Sally? Do you remember?
No idea.
Yeah. But I mean, there were 15 homes anyway
19 homes.
on Prospect Hill off
Yeah.
of that one.
Yep.
So We got some really fancy stuff out here for you guys
We got
to
some-
look at. Yeah, yeah.
One last thing, not to be gauche and talk about money again, but what for a year of collecting this data and stuff like that, what does that run and what does that take in terms of personnel?
Or, and maybe another way of asking it is, we have 50,000.
I don't know.
What would-
We got $50,000.
What would-
How far can we stretch that?
Yeah,
Well,
Yeah.
I think how the committee did it in the past,
Mhm.
which was how I first got involved, was they put out an RFP
Mhm.
for a project proposals,
oh,
and you give them a budget, and then you can see what people come
Oh,
forward
okay.
with project proposals. And
If you were to identify a project proposal that you think would be the most valuable to us to get a bang for our buck, what do you think that you might suggest?
well, it's kind of hard to give you a project proposal off the top of my head because it takes time to put one together and thought and so forth. But I think some questions could be, is there, there's been this flooding due to the beaver. How has that changed the hydrogeochemistry of the bog? How might that be related to the plant diversity? And maybe there's a collaboration there between the data that's already being collected and someone who would do something similar to the Maze report, and repeat that. And maybe we add some additional probes to get some understanding, and get some understanding of groundwater contributions to the wetland itself.
okay.
And that might be more than 50,000, but or it might be less. I don't know until you have to,
Well, and I
that's
think
why you have to have people put together a budget and.
Right. And I think, obviously we have to go out for an RFP. The nice thing from what I understand is that what the umbrella it has to be under for us is that it has to be considered a hydrological study. So however we define that, it sounds like we are good to use it. But that's why it's good to hear, just to kind of figure out, because potentially we either could find more grant money if it's out there coming into the fall season, or we have to gear up and go to town meeting next year and ask for a little bit more, depending on what we're thinking.
Well, I think the good news is that, there has been this data collection funded by the DOT, and implemented by UMass. And that would be one piece of information to find out is, how long is that continuing? And then just to leverage that for additional information. And it would probably be good to talk with that, because I haven't looked at the data since 2020. So to talk with them, to hear from them where their challenges are, because I think they're just kind of continuing doing what they can, given the new state of the wetland with the beaver.
And who is that at UMass? That's
So that is, I can send you the information,
That'd
but here I can.
I guess the reason I was asking that question was that if you're going to put out for an RFP, it seems like you ought to have some narrow scope of
Right.
like, what are we looking for an RFP? We
Yeah, certainly.
can't have 50,000 different
yeah.
ideas about, and we'd have to know what we think is important before we did.
Right.
Eric Heinlein, so ERICH, and his last name is spelled HINLEIN.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And the person who works with him is Camilla, CAMELIA. Rotaru, Rotaru. And so she's the person who goes out. She's a senior research engineer. So Eric runs the lab, and she's an employee, and she's the person who goes out and collects the water samples and does the chemistry.
Great.
Awesome. Anything else while we have?
I really appreciate your time.
Truly,
This is very helpful.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah,
This-
thank you.
Sure.
really, really awesome.
And I'd be happy to talk further, because I am kind of interested in the groundwater upwelling question. But I do recognize that sort of the original study design that Eric and Camilla implemented back in 2018 isn't working to its full capacity because of the changes in flow. So, and if we talk to them, they could explain what those issues are specifically, since they're the ones collecting the data.
Great.
Great.
So, I'd encourage you to invite them to,
Awesome.
Great. Thank you.
and I'd be happy to attend.
That's really generous. of you.
It's
Thank
very-
you.
yeah,
Thank
truly.
you so much.
All right. Well, not to hold you up today because we'll see you again soon, it sounds like. Thank you so much for coming and helping us figure this all out.
Yeah, very
All right.
nice. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Amy.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
All right.
Before you adjourn,
Yeah.
I'd like to make a statement.
Yeah.
I just came in from walking the Massachusetts Turnpike from the West Stockbridge line to Route 183 on the north side. I'm doing a personal study of the hydrogeology of that part of Stockbridge. And I was responsible for getting Professor Dave Bout, the hydrogeologist at UMass, involved with the town. And
B-O-U-T?
pardon, David Bout, Boutt.
B-O-U-T-T.
Yeah. And that study was taken over by, or handed to Water and Sewer, and where my request had been to study the groundwater geology connected to our town reservoir. It was changed in town meeting to a safe yield study, but still I'm hanging on to the evident reality, part of which was keyed by reading what you said years ago about your well and how it had been. I mean, I remember there was publicity about that maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And what I've discovered is that there is substantial evidence of karst geology in Stockbridge. Now, I'm building on top of my personal contact with Nicholas Radcliffe, who, and the conversation I had with him about the Stockbridge Quadrangle. And also just personal experience with geology and the Eastern Overthrust, which is plate tectonics, and why we have this white rock band going north and south through the town. It's when we look at Kampoosa Bog, we're looking through a window. It's as if we're looking through the window into a palace, really, because the Marble Valley itself is a grand structure. And, you can see, for example, in Adams, you can see that very large white rock mining operation, and the same in Canaan, Connecticut. And you
How long
can,
is cobble?
the Green River is the Green River because it's calcareous rock and the Great Spring at Stockbridge, it's running right through.
Right.
It's also underneath Lake Haverick and entirely under the Stockbridge Bowl. And so I would urge you guys, when you take a look at this, that maybe you get together with some of the other interested bodies in town and try to take a look at the question of what it means if we have karst going on here, because karst does exactly what Sally's talking about. It moves contaminants in ways that regular groundwater doesn't. And it's really exciting stuff. And we are the only one of the very few towns, part of Williamstown, Lanesboro, part of Lenox, Great Barrington gets its water out of wells out of the Green River. So, but we have, our water comes out, out of this kind of aquifer. And it would be really exciting if you guys could be the lead of one of the most important ways of looking at Stockbridge in 100 years. I mean, it's really big.
Yeah.
It's really big. And Sally, you're right on the front lines of it. I mean, your knowledge of Rattlesnake Hill, the the Hill Water Company, what happened, what you just mentioned about I've heard the chairman of Concom talk about Gould Meadow and say, well, there are these springs going up and down and we don't know why it's all karst. I mean, that the stream coming down in the corner goes underground and comes back up, and all those springs coming down from Kripalu and Mohican Brook. There are springs along the side of Route 183 where water comes out and goes back. It's
all throughout the
it's
DeSisto property.
fantastic. It's
All throughout the DeSisto property, there are springs that come up and down, which fortunately now are protected. So,
Good.
because we couldn't protect them years ago when they tried to do the project, I don't know, 15 years
the
ago.
equestrian center. Was that?
One of that one and the one before it and,
Yeah.
all of that. And we went out with our conservation agent, and we looked at it all, and we looked at the streams coming up and down throughout the back, and we couldn't protect it because it was not continuous above ground.
Huh.
And that is it's a thing. I mean,
That's a symptom of karst. Yeah.
it could, and I kept saying, but there's springs out there and there's water coming in and it's going out. And if we put a road through, and that's what they were talking about doing, putting a road through, it's going to have massive effect.
Well, not to, to your well situation, the chemical signatures that you would find in that well, potentially, it's salt, right? There's no.
It was salt.
There's
Particularly high salt level.
So if the salt is there, if mapping the salt where you find it there and it's uphill of where all the salt is dropping, not to say that there isn't salt on town roads, but I don't know. There's not that we can take this money and study necessarily that right now, but that's a great question for
Well, I mean,
funding.
think about it from its geographical perspective.
Right.
It was on the corner of Prospect Hill and Rattlesnake Mountain Road.
Right.
So at the time, there were like no houses. And when my parents bought the property in the 50s, the only person who lived beyond us was John Pensivy. So in the winter, well, if there were houses, but there were Beechwood, but the only person in the winter who went by our house was John Pensevie.
Wow.
There was nobody else. And Rattlesnake or Prospect Hill was dirt.
Mm.
And so when the turnpike went through, some of the houses were there. Our house was part of the Palmer Farm, which there was, which is now Mary Stokes's place and the Frelingheisen's place and our house. And then there was a house across the street, and then there was the Ford Farm. So there were a very small number of houses in the area. So the amount of salt that was going down on the road was really minimal to all of a sudden have us have
Right.
salt in our well.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah. That's-
Unless we found a salt mine.
exactly.
On that note, any other thoughts of business? Our next meeting,
I just have that back then.
oh, that'd be better.
Yes, thank you.
Now, I think we discussed it last time, taking a break.
Mhm.
So that would put I also think we have a lot of action items, that maybe we can, have some people reach out to UMass, particularly Eric.
Sounds like he would be a really interesting person to have come in.
Exactly.
By some people.
Well, you were so good with Amy.
My sister always told me I'd wash the dishes really well.
If
Such a
you
good
could,
job.
if you could reach out to Eric.
Yep. Knowing it's summer and these people may not be.
Right. No, yeah, I mean,
Right, yep.
you have 2 months, so however you want to play that.
So I have the next Kampoosa meeting on the 15th of September. Is that correct?
That sounds, is that, what Monday is that?
It is the third Monday in September.
Third Monday, yeah.
9:15 at 5:30. Okay.
5:30. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
One after that, the 20th of October
Perfect. Team,
and the 17th of November,
November. Let's start with those three and then we'll,
15th of December.
Great.
I mean, that'd be nice if it all plays out like that. Obviously, if we get invites and stuff out, we can be a little flexible, if they're able to do a different, time. And I think, over the summer break here, we can think about, maybe if you're reaching out to Eric, we wait for Eric. If not, worry about getting the RFP out or anything like that. But we can have some more discussions with Amy and Eric, to kind of figure out what it looks like before we really put that out. Anything else in the meantime? I know,
I would like some kind of report from Toro about how,
I did email her
okay,
and got nothing.
yeah, I know, she doesn't. But it doesn't she have to tell the Concom?
I'm sorry?
Doesn't she have to tell the Concom how it went?
Not really, because DEP took it over.
Hmm.
Okay.
All right, we'll keep trying that. Maybe it's just busy season.
Yeah, maybe in the middle of winter, she'll be,
Right.
she won't have anything to do.
Actually, I've heard that's the busy season.
That's the busy, so maybe we're going into it and she'll have more time.
I can bug her.
And, okay. And then in the meantime, if we think about potentially doing a pared down, maybe doing a big meeting in the winter time. If we can make connections now over the next few months, maybe we can get everyone onto the same page and do a hybrid in-person Zoom meeting and get some people to present, maybe.
If she sends a list of contacts,
Yeah,
then maybe we can reach out to those people.
yeah, and start seeing who's interested
Yeah.
and whatnot. Okay,
Allison Dixon would be,
She did come.
did
She
she?
did talk to us a while ago,
Okay.
probably before you were on the commission. And she said she would come back.
Because she was the engineer, if I remember, for Mass DOT at the time. And then she moved to HVA.
Right, and then when she came here, she was leaving HVA. I don't know where
Yeah.
she was going, but she said she would come back because she knew a lot.
Mhm.
And, yeah, she would be a good contact.
And did you say you know Tim Simmons?
I sort of do, yeah. If I have a contact for
If
him,
you have a contact,
I can get in touch with him.
Send it.
Yeah,
hopefully, yeah.
yeah, I'll talk to Tim.
Okay,
Okay, great.
cool.
See if I can squeeze out where the native frag.
I'm sure, like, I can't tell you what I went and saw.
Yeah,
But we-
I know.
I just can't.
He protected it with his life. It was
Yeah.
really pretty fun.
You actually signed a paper saying you won't tell, but when you adjourn the meeting, then I'll
Someone else is gonna adjourn.
make a motion to
Second.
close the public. hearing.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you.